December 7, 1941. A date seared into American memory, yet the story of that day's aftermath, and the crucible that forged America's naval air power, begins much earlier. It begins with a realization, a stark and immediate truth after the attack on Pearl Harbor. American fighter planes were outmatched, inferior in climb and maneuverability to the Japanese Zero. This was not a surprise to everyone. Lieutenant Commander John S. Ayres and David Hanusson's Jimmie Thach had observed these performance variances even before the war. He saw the urgent need for new tactics to counter Japanese air superiority. Thach was uniquely suited for this challenge. His early life, marked by a near-fatal childhood incident, instilled a deep resilience. His mother's advice that you could do anything if you wanted it bad enough and were willing to invest your time became his guiding principle. Practical skills learned on a grandparent's farm, fishing, hunting, shooting, would later translate directly to combat. He entered the U.S. Naval Academy in the summer of 1923, a young man who struggled academically but excelled on the football field. Earning the nickname Jimmy from his classmates, an injured shoulder ended his football career, but not his competitive drive. His initial assignments on battleships like the USS Mississippi and USS California exposed him to critical communication system limitations and even cryptanalysis, foreshadowing a career focused on problem-solving. Though initially reluctant, he reported for flight training at Pensacola in February 1929. Advised by Lieutenant Commander George D. Murray, Pensacola was a proving ground. Nearly two-thirds of his flight training class did not complete the course. Thach himself had close calls, within one unsatisfactory grade of elimination. But he pushed through, graduating top of his class in both ground school and flying in January 1930. This period was a relentless immersion in the rapidly evolving world of naval aviation. He flew everything from primary seaplanes to multi-engine patrol craft. He observed outstanding aviators like LTTs, John Crommelin and Frank Akers, and experienced the intense competitive spirit of early fighter pilots. His assignment to Fighter Squadron 1B, VF-1B, in June 1930 placed him on the cutting edge of carrier operations aboard the colossal USS Saratoga and USS Lexington. These 33,000-ton behemoths, converted from battlecruiser hulls, were the future of naval power. Here, Thach honed precision formation flying, even demonstrating stunts with 9 planes tied by a manila line. He flew the Boeing F-2B-1, a single-seat biplane powered by a 425-horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, capable of 158 miles per hour. But even then, technology was advancing. It was replaced by the slower, 2-seat Curtiss F-8C4 Helldiver, its deteriorating fabric wings a clear sign of the limitations of the era. A pivotal experience came with his role as a test pilot between 1932 and 1934. This wasn't just about flying, it was about pushing the limits of experimental aircraft. He tackled planes with difficult horizontal stabilizers and experienced the immense power of experimental patrol craft, like the 24,000-pound XP-2H1, capable of carrying double its weight. Such tests were inherently dangerous, requiring costly insurance premiums, and often involved only 1 or 2 familiarization flights. This test pilot experience exposed him to the future of naval aviation, most notably the rise of Grumman. He witnessed the critical test between Grumman's experimental 2-seat fighter, with recessed wheels, and Boeing's XF-6B. Grumman's lightweight all-metal designs proved decisively superior, foreshadowing its dominance in carrier-based fighters. The Great Depression limited resources and flying time, but it also fostered ingenuity. Thach received crucial mentorship from Lieutenant Commander Arthur W. Radford, the commander of VF-1B and a future chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Radford instilled a pragmatic understanding of the Navy's mission and the importance of mission-critical decision-making. By the mid-1930s, the shadow of Japan's expansionism began to darken the Pacific. Japan's invasion of Manchuria in September 1931 spurred the U.S. Navy's focus on long-range patrol aircraft. Early aircraft, with their open cockpits, unreliable engines, and primitive navigation, demanded immense skill and took a heavy physical toll on crews. The introduction of the consolidated PBY Catalina patrol plane was a significant leap forward, offering unprecedented range, speed, and payload capacity. The technology alone was insufficient. The Navy shifted its emphasis from aircraft development to operational exercises and tactical training. The transition from biplanes to monoplane fighters, driven by observations of European air combat, also revealed critical deficiencies in USA armament and speed compared to potential adversaries. The Brewster Buffalo, for example, marked a crucial step towards modern aerial combat, yet its initial shortcomings highlighted the urgent need for better performance and armament. By late 1940, Lieutenant Thach became executive officer of VF-3. This squadron faced formidable challenges. Newer fighter aircraft, like the F-2A1, F-2A2, and F-4F3, were slow to arrive, forcing VF-3 to rely on mechanically troubled Brewster Buffaloes. These planes were plagued by landing gear failures and engine issues with their Wright R-1820 Cyclone radial engines, leading to master rod bearing damage and oil leaks. In one instance, oil leaks. In one instance, Edward H. Butch O'Hare, the squadron's engineering officer, had to execute a dead-stick landing due to engine failure. Then, tragedy struck. On December 12, 1940, the intended commander of VF-3 suffered a fatal heart attack. Thach was unexpectedly elevated to command, a turning point that allowed him to implement his strategic vision. He found a highly compatible partner in his executive officer, Lieutenant Donald A. Lovelace, who was instrumental in molding the squadron. Intelligence reports from the Fleet Air Tactical Unit began to confirm the formidable capabilities of the Japanese Mitsubishi Zero. Its purported top speed of nearly 380 miles per hour, a climb rate of 5,000 feet per minute, and armament of two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns were alarming. These reports served as a direct catalyst for Thach's theoretical development of new tactics. Existing fighter formations, typically three-plane sections, were deemed inadequate. They hindered pilot effectiveness and lookout capabilities. Thach began to visualize a better solution. A tactical maneuver that would allow slower, less agile American fighters to counter the Zero's speed and maneuverability. He called it the beam defense position, later known as the FAC weave. It was an innovative two-plane, four-aircraft formation where two fighters would fly parallel and, when attacked, turn toward each other, creating a deadly crossfire. This provided mutual beam support and allowed continuous tracking of the enemy. Working with Butch O'Hare, Thach tested and validated this tactic in aerial exercises, using chalk lines drawn on the Enterprise's deck to illustrate the geometry. This innovation was met with initial skepticism. Vice Admiral William F. Halsey, though a legendary commander, had initially rejected two-plane sections for carrier squadrons, but Thach's persistent advocacy, fueled by the stark reality of the Zero threat, eventually led to a reversal of Halsey's decision, providing the organizational framework for the new tactic. The broader geopolitical climate underscored the urgency. Germany's invasion of Poland in September 1939 ignited World War II in Europe. The U.S. Neutrality Act and Lend-Lease policy diverted critical resources. The sinking of destroyers like the USS Kearney and USS Reuben James in late 1941 demonstrated the escalating naval conflict even before America officially entered the war. By December 7, 1941, only 11 F-4, F-3 Wildcats were available for VF-3, and ammunition for gunnery exercises was severely rationed. The U.S. exercises was severely rationed. Navy was far from prepared. For decades, the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was understood as a sudden, unprovoked assault. However, newly examined records reveal a deeper truth. It was the culmination of decades of rising tensions and Japanese grievances. Japan felt slighted by the mediated end to the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, brokered by President Theodore Roosevelt. Perceived discrimination by the U.S., exemplified by the San Francisco School Board incident and formalized by the immigration law of 1924, fueled deep resentment. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 imposing a 5-5-3 ship ratio on Japan. Japan's imperial ambitions, driven by a desperate lack of critical industrial resources, like iron and oil, escalated. its September 1931 invasion of Manchuria met with weak international response. By 1936, Japan had withdrawn from the League of Nations and disavowed naval treaties, signaling a clear rejection of international norms. The global depression had weakened Western democracy's ability to confront aggression. The U.S. responded with economic pressure. The Export Control Act of 1940 and the Asset Freeze of July 1941 eliminated nearly 90% of Japan's petroleum imports. This was an effective ultimatum: submit or go to war. Japan chose war. On December 2, 1941, the order to climb Mount Itaka sent a formidable armada of 6 large aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 11 destroyers, and 18 tankers steaming towards Pearl Harbor. The attack itself was a shock, exposing systemic failures in U.S. defense and intelligence. But for those in the Pacific, like Jimmie Thach, the war began with a different kind of lesson. Thach and his VF-3 squadron, now aboard the USS Lexington, were initially held back from the fighting, a source of intense frustration for pilots like Butch O'Hare. The early days of the war were a brutal education. On February 20, 1942, the Lexington was discovered by a Japanese flying boat. This initiated a series of aerial attacks. 7 Mitsubishi G4M1 Betty bombers approached Task Force 11. These bombers, capable of over 260 miles per hour, were formidable adversaries. Thach and his squadron engaged. In the ensuing combat, Ensign Jack Wilson was killed by a Betty's tail cannon, a devastating loss that forced the Thach to critically re-evaluate his tactics. He realized that attacking bombers required precision, like a target sleeve, rather than pure fighter dogfighting. Despite the challenges, VF-3 downed 7 of the 9 Bettys in that first wave. Then came the second wave. 8 bombers headed straight for the Lexington. Butch O'Hare, his wingman Marion Dufilo, suffering from malfunctioning guns, launched a solo defense. In an extraordinary display of skill and courage, O'Hare engaged the bombers alone, shooting down 5 and damaging a 6th. He became an instant national hero, his actions symbolizing American resilience and bravery. Later, on March 10, 1942, Thach participated in the critical raid on Leh and Salamaua. This was a successful but costly offensive that, despite limitations like flawed torpedoes, only one exploding against an enemy ship, inflicted significant damage. It delayed a key Japanese offensive, buying crucial time for U.S. days' preparations. As the war progressed, Thach's role transitioned from combat pilot to instructor. The intense pace of the early war had highlighted significant pre-war austerity's detrimental impact on combat readiness. There was an urgent need to train new pilots and adapt to the growing demand for naval aviators. Thach, alongside Lieutenant Commander James H. Flatley Jr., focused on training and tactical discussions. By May 1942, the stage was set for a monumental confrontation, the Battle of Midway. Admiral Nimitz's intelligence section had broken Japanese codes, providing a crucial strategic advantage. Yet, the pilots flying into battle, including Thach and his squadron, remained unaware of this intelligence. They would rely on their skill, their tactics, and their courage. For Midway, Thach was reassigned to the USS Yorktown. His squadron, VF-3, was integrated with VF-42 pilots. This was a complex process, integrating new aircraft and less experienced personnel for the impending battle. Experienced pilots like William N. Leonard, Richard Crommelin, and Arthur J. Complin Brassfield were elevated to leadership roles. Don Lovelace, Thach's trusted executive officer, volunteered to serve alongside him once more. On the morning of June 4, 1942, moments before the battle, tragedy struck. Robert C. Evans crashed on top of Don Lovelace's Wildcat, killing Lovelace. It was a devastating personal blow and a stark reminder of the immense dangers. The tactical challenges were overwhelming. Thach was informed he would only have 6 fighters instead of 8 for escort duty. Japanese Zero fighters were nearly twice as fast as SBD, dauntless dive bombers, and 3 times faster than the slower TBD Devastator torpedo planes. These TBD, despite their earlier success at Coral Sea, were painfully vulnerable. Thach made a critical decision. He would prioritize the defense of the slower torpedo planes over the dive bombers. His reasoning was that the Japanese might not repeat their mistake of concentrating fighter defense solely at high altitudes. He launched with a six-plane formation, 2 pilots flying lower and behind to provide layered defense. As the engagement began, Thach's small escort group faced an estimated 20 Zeros. His radio was dead from battle damage, preventing crucial tactical communication. Yet, the fat weave worked. He and his wingman Enz, Macomber, executed the coordinated turns. Zeros attempting to follow them were met with a crossfire, discouraging their pursuit. Thach himself scored his first kill, a 0 too slow in its pullout. The cost, however, was immense. Most of the TBDs, like those from VT-8 and VT-6, were shot down before releasing their torpedoes. Their sacrifice drew critical Japanese fighter attention away from the incoming SBDs. Then, the tide turned. Unescorted Dauntless dive bombers from the USS Enterprise and Hornet descended on the Japanese carriers. In a matter of minutes, the Soryu, Kaga, and Akagi were crippled. Later, the Hiryu would also fall. Midway was a decisive victory. Thach landed back aboard the Yorktown after nearly 3 hours in the air, discovering a bullet hole in his fuel tank and a severed oil line. Despite severe damage from 3 Japanese bombs, which had crippled the flight deck and engineering spaces, the Yorktown was a resilient ship. It was eventually able to achieve 16 knots, allowing for fighter launches from a patched deck. Thach himself engaged and destroyed Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, the Japanese strike leader. Though Tomonaga managed to release a torpedo, the Battle of Midway crippled the Japanese Navy's offensive capabilities, marking the shift from a Japanese offensive to an American offensive in the Pacific. The Thach weave had proven its worth, demonstrating the importance of tactical innovation in overcoming superior enemy aircraft. It would become a cornerstone of fighter tactics for decades. Yet, even in victory, there were stark lessons. The USS Yorktown, despite its valiant stand, was fatally wounded. On June 1942, as salvage efforts continued, 2 torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-168 struck the Yorktown and the USS Hammond, which was alongside providing power. The Yorktown's design flaw, its boiler and engine rooms not being alternated, contributed to its eventual loss. At dawn on June 7th, the USS Yorktown slipped beneath the surface. The battle also revealed critical shortcomings in USS fighter technology. Post-battle analysis confirmed the F-4 Wildcat's inferiority in climb, maneuverability, and speed compared to the Japanese Zero. Its range was totally inadequate, and its gun sight deemed completely insufficient. These complaints from pilots like Lieutenant Company James Gray and later Butch O'Hare fueled an urgent demand for a new fighter. The first experimental F-6F Hellcat flew just weeks after Midway, entering combat in August 1943. For the American public, the narrative of Midway was initially distorted. Public announcements credited land-based B-17 bombers for successes actually achieved by naval aviators. However, detailed analysis proved high-altitude bombing against shipping was, as Thach later observed, an exercise in futility. Midway also highlighted the need for better strategic coordination, the separation of U.S. Strait and U.S. coordination. Carrier task forces led to a lack of mutual air support. Thach later regretted that a few more minutes' notice on the 4th of June, 1942 inches, might have allowed them to intercept torpedo planes more effectively. The tactical genius of the Thach weave was now formally recognized. Mid-June 1942, Lieutenant Commander Jimmie Thach, another keen observer of combat, penned a 9-page letter titled The Navy Fighter. He documented his growing reservations about the Wildcat, advocating for a team-based approach to combat. Thach's letter reached Admirals King and Nimitz, underscoring the critical need for change. Thach, now tasked with revising the U.S. fighter doctrine USF-74, responded to Thach's ideas. Thach initially proposed a 6-plane division, but Thach argued this would lead to lost sections in combat. He championed his 4-plane division, emphasizing its mutual beam support and ability to track multiple targets. The debate was settled through shared experience. In August 1942, Thach and Butch O'Hare trained together in Maui. O'Hare, with his direct combat experience and belief in Thach's 4-plane division, persuaded Flatley to adopt the tactic. By September, Flatley was fully teaching the Thach weave. His personal validation came on October 26, 1942, during the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. Using the Thach weave in a dire situation, he survived. Flatley was the one who famously coined the phrase Thach weave, ensuring its dissemination throughout the fleet. To further disseminate this critical knowledge, the Navy partnered with Walt Disney and Warner Brothers. Thach himself was heavily involved in producing 10 animated training films, averaging 30 minutes each. These films, like the Jacksonville Project, provided pilots with crucial tactical knowledge and a feel for the battles they would enter, effectively bridging the gap between theory and combat. Perhaps the most definitive validation of Thach's insights came from a captured Japanese Zero. On July 10, 1942, a Zero was discovered mostly intact on Akuton Island, Alaska. Damaged during the Battle of Midway, it was salvaged and transported to San Diego for analysis. Tests between September and October 1942 confirmed Thach's observations: the Zero's superior speed and climb above 1,000 feet, its incredible turning maneuverability, and its lighter construction. It weighed only 3,718 pounds empty, nearly 2,000 pounds less than a Wildcat. Crucially, the Zero lacked leak-proof tanks or armor, and its engine cut out in pushovers, confirming its fragility. This analysis directly informed U.S. aircraft development, especially the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, which were designed to exploit the Zero's weaknesses. The Corsair, in particular, proved superior in level and diving speeds, and in climb above 20,000 feet. Thach's impact extended beyond tactics. He strongly advocated for stricter pilot training standards. He presented evidence to Rear Admiral George Murray, Chief of Air Intermediate Training Command, of unnecessary pilot deaths due to lenient standards. Murray promised change, recognizing the life-or-death importance. Thach also navigated public relations challenges, most notably concerning the Colin P. Kelly Jr. incident. Kelly, a B-17 pilot, was mistakenly credited by the media with sinking the Japanese battleship Haruna. Thach clarified that Kelly attacked a cruiser, and his true heroism lay in his actions, allowing his crew to bail out of a burning plane. The Haruna, in fact, survived much later in the war. This experience, though uncomfortable for Thach, increased his demand and influence as a credible voice. By March 1944, Thach, now promoted to commander, was recruited by Vice Admiral John McCain for his staff. McCain, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air, recognized Thach as not a yes man, valuing his candid, experienced insight. This marked Thach's transition to a more direct operational role in the Pacific Theater at a critical juncture of the war. He would serve as a special assistant to Captain Arleigh A. Burke, Chief of Staff to Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of the Fast Carrier Task Force Pacific. The U.S. Navy was rapidly shifting from a defensive posture to overwhelming quantitative and qualitative superiority. In June 1942, the U.S. had only 4 aircraft carriers in the Pacific. By spring 1944, the U.S. Navy possessed a formidable fleet. Thach's influence, through his tactics and training, had played a pivotal role in shaping the aviators who would wield this new power. June 1944, the Mariana Islands. The U.S. fleet massed for Operation Forager, aimed at securing Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. This would bring American bombers within range of Japan. Commander Thach, now a key staff officer, arrived aboard Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher's flagship, the USS Lexington, on June 5. His mission, to observe and identify potential staff errors, documenting everything in his little black books. This period was marked by critical strategic and tactical debates. Admiral Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, was known for his cautious, defensive-minded approach. Mitcher, commander of the fast carriers, was aggressive, eager to engage and destroy the enemy. This tension would define the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Japanese strategy, meanwhile, underestimated the immediate threat to the Marianas. They anticipated an Allied advance from the southwest. Critically, the prevailing easterly winds in the region offered a significant tactical advantage to Japanese carriers, complicating American launch and recovery operations. On June 15, 1944, Marines stormed ashore on Saipan. That evening, a torpedo plane attacked the Lexington, narrowly missing the island structure. A 40mm quad battery demonstrated its effectiveness, but the incident underscored the ever-present danger. On the night of June 18, the Corps' strategic debate unfolded. Mitscher proposed a westward advance to strike Japanese carriers at dawn. But Spruance, prioritizing the protection of the invasion fleet, rejected Mitscher's plan, opting for a defensive posture. This decision, which Mitscher met with profanity and exasperation, would become a central point of historical discussion. On June 19, the battle was joined. Japanese aircraft launched from well outside American carrier plane radius, planning to refuel on Guam and return. But the U.S. fuel's Navy was ready. Lieutenant Joseph R. Joe Eggert orchestrated the defense, and Task Force 58, with its 15 carriers, executed a highly organized task group formation. Fighters provided overlapping cover. Approximately 400 enemy planes attacked. Only a dozen reached Task Force 58 ships. It was a slaughter, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. On June 20th, the battle culminated in a twilight attack on the retreating mobile fleet. Over 200 American aircraft were launched. Nearly 24 were lost to intense anti-aircraft fire. The USS Ohio was the only enemy carrier sunk by U.S. carrier aircraft in this engagement. The challenges of night carrier operations were starkly revealed during the recovery phase. Searchlights, intended to aid landings, proved blinding, leading to aircraft losses due to fuel exhaustion, fatigue, and deck crashes. Thach suggested illuminated flight decks, like airport runways, to improve safety. The Battle of the Philippine Sea decimated Japanese carrier aviation, effectively ending their ability to contest Allied advances. The Marianas were secured by August 10th, providing vital bases. The strategic debate between Spruance and Mitscher highlighted enduring command philosophies, but Mitscher's aggressive stance ultimately proved more decisive in crippling the enemy. By late 1944, the Pacific War had evolved into a conflict of immense scale and rapid technological advancement. Aircraft, ordnance, and tactics were continuously improving. The U.S. Navy now possessed overwhelming air power. Thach and Jimmie Thach, now operations officers for Admirals McCain and Mitscher respectively, were indispensable. They were crucial for translating strategic objectives into tactical success. Admiral McCain, commander of Task Group 38.1, was particularly open to new ideas. Thach found a strong partner in his assistant Bill Leonard and in Rear Admiral Baker, McCain's chief of staff. It was clear that fighter pilots, with their combat experience and improvisational skills, were uniquely suited for these demanding operational roles. The pressure to secure the Philippines demanded aggressive naval action. The Japanese were fiercely committed to its defense. By late 1944, carrier aircraft complements had shifted. Big carriers would operate 54 fighters and only 24 bombers. This reflected a recognition of the evolving nature of aerial combat and the paramount need for air superiority. Hellcat fighters now replaced the Wildcats, representing a significant upgrade. On October 10, 1944, U.S. ACARD strikes began on Okinawa. From October 12 to 14, Task Force 38 planes attacked Formosa. This was a pivotal engagement. The U.S. Navy inflicted significant losses, destroying over 500 enemy planes. It effectively crippled Japanese carrier air power and forced a strategic reassessment of their defense plans, allowing for the successful Leyte landings. However, new challenges emerged. Thach advised Thach that new 11-inch Tiny Tim rockets were problematic, requiring too much storage, lacking accuracy, and having insufficient explosive power. Napalm, a new weapon in 1944, had its potential and problems not fully appreciated until after seeing photographic evidence. The enemy also began using aluminum chaff to confuse radar sets. The Battle of Leyte Gulf began to unfold in late October 1944. It was a complex, multifaceted engagement. The Japanese plan was audacious. Use decoy carriers of the Northern Force to draw Halsey's fleet away from Leyte, allowing the powerful center force to attack the vulnerable landing beaches. On the night of October 24th, Halsey made his fateful decision. He committed all available carriers and battleships north, Believing the center force was no longer a threat, Mitchell's operations officers, Flatley and Burke, were convinced the Northern force was a decoy. They urged Mitchell to warn Halsey, but Mitchell, exasperated, refrained from directly challenging his superior. The consequences were immediate and nearly catastrophic. Just after dawn on October 25th, the center force, comprising 4 battleships including the mighty Yamato and 6 heavy cruisers, appeared off Leyte beaches. It surprised 4 USBs, escort carriers of Taffy 3, the northernmost of the 3 escort carrier groups. This exposed the vulnerability Halsey's gamble had created. The Battle off Samar was a heroic but outmatched defense. The U.S. lost the escort carrier Gambier Bay, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. But a critical turning point occurred. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, commander of the center force, ordered a withdrawal off Samar. He believed opposition would strengthen and feared overwhelming air attacks. This pivotal decision saved the Leyte landings from potentially catastrophic attack. At the same time, the Japanese introduced a terrifying new weapon, the kamikaze. The first successful attack struck the escort carrier Santee on October 25th, killing 16 crew. This marked the undeniable arrival of suicide attacks, a weapon facere of its time. By the end of November, 5 Essex-class carriers, 2 light carriers, had been damaged by kamikazes. Thach, now operations officer for the entire Task Force 38, faced immense challenges. He had to contend with rearming aircraft, improvising carrier landing procedures, and developing entirely new defensive tactics. He and McCain developed the Moose Trap exercise and associated defensive tactics like Tomcat and Watchdog patrols, designed to counter the kamikaze threat. Proximity fuses for 5-inch shells, introduced in 1943, proved effective anti-aircraft weapons. The Battle of Leyte Gulf destroyed the Japanese carrier fleet, effectively ending their offensive naval air power. It secured the Leyte landings, a crucial step in the Allied liberation of the Philippines. It also demonstrated the U.S. Navy's ability to innovate and adapt under extreme pressure. However, it also revealed a critical logistical challenge. The U.S. pieces could build carriers faster than Japan could damage them, but not as fast as they were being damaged by kamikazes. The war in the Pacific was now a grinding, relentless advance. The continuous operations of the Fast Carrier Task Force were essential. Thach developed the Big Blue Blanket, a 3-strike system that dramatically reduced windows of opportunity for enemy aircraft to retaliate. This was a critical improvement over the previous 2-strike procedures, creating a continuous air cover over enemy airfields. The challenges were not just enemy airfields. In December 1944, a devastating typhoon struck the fleet. 3 destroyers were lost, and many ships were damaged. It highlighted the critical importance of naval leadership's decision-making in extreme weather and the vulnerability of ships when not properly managed. On January 21, 1945, Thach experienced the perils firsthand. A malfunctioning Avenger bomb nearly hit him. On the same day, multiple kamikaze attacks succeeded against USA ships. Compounding the problem was a strategic miscommunication with Army Air Force operations, which had pulled their patrols, creating a critical breach in defense. This incident served as a catalyst. Thach and McCain successfully pleaded with Halsey to cease attacks on shipping and concentrate all efforts on enemy airfields. This shift in focus proved highly effective in neutralizing immediate threats. Thach's innovations, from the individual pilot struggle to the grand strategy of fleet defense, were fundamental to the U.S. Navy's eventual air superiority. His career exemplifies a relentless pursuit of improvement and adaptation, his influence shaping the very nature of naval air warfare and saving countless lives. Thach's layered defense strategies, born from intense scrutiny, would significantly mitigate the kamikaze threat, a terror that defined the war's final stages. The Big Blue Blanket, a continuous 3-strike system, replaced the less effective Holy Blanket concept, ensuring constant air cover over the fleet. This was a radical departure from the traditional 2-deckload strikes, reducing enemy reaction time and denying them easy targets. Its success, along with relentless combat air patrols, enabled Major and Lingayen Gulf Allied ground forces could advance with confidence, knowing their flanks and supply lines were protected. The tactics, championed by Admiral McCain, often given evocative names like Tomcat and Watchdog, strategically disrupted Japanese defense plans, crippling their logistical capabilities by denying effective air operations. McCain worked tirelessly with Thach to implement these ideas, even discussing sensitive information with Admiral King. Yet, operational success was not always immediately apparent or perfectly quantifiable in the heat of battle. Post-war analysis would refine the claimed statistics, revealing the imperfect nature of immediate battlefield reporting. But the intellectual and tactical innovations were undeniable, proving naval warfare was far more than brute force. It was a constant chess match, demanding big ingenuity. The late 1944 period saw the big blue blanket terminology take hold, as Task Force 38 departed Alethi on December 10, 1944, for operations in the Philippines. Strikes on Luzon commenced December 14, 16, followed by the disastrous typhoon of December 17, 18, 1944, a brutal reminder of nature's power. After resupply, the task force was back at sea, December 30th, raiding Luzon, Formosa, and Okinawa. The sheer scale of the conflict was immense, with 403 enemy vessels sunk or damaged in January alone, totaling an estimated 617,000 tons. Aerial combat claimed 149 enemy aircraft, while 466 were destroyed on the ground, and another 671 damaged, disrupting their air arm. However, the cost was also high for Task Force 38, losing 98 planes in combat and 103 operationally that month. January 4, 1945 brought the report of a suicide plane mortally wounding the escort carrier Omani Bay. Then came the particularly disastrous day of January 21, 1945. Multiple kamikaze hits struck the Ticonderoga CV-14, causing nearly 350 officer and crew casualties. The destroyer Maddox DD-731 also sustained a hit. Adding to the tragedy, a hung-up bomb on a TBM Avenger led to the accidental bombing of the Hancock CV-19. Despite these setbacks, the Army successfully landed on Luzon on January 9, 1945. As planned, a testament to the preceding air superiority efforts. Strikes against northern Formosa and Okinawa continued on January 22, 1945. McCain's command ended on January 25, relinquishing his post after Hancock returned to Anchorage. He flew back to Pearl Harbor on January 27th, his staff following aboard Ticonderoga on January 31st. Thach's crucial contributions, often kept secret during wartime, earned him the prestigious Legion of Merit. His innovations gained later public acknowledgement, even participating in a March of Time broadcast on March 1, 1945, with McCain, and featured in a July 1945 Saturday Evening Post article. The very nature of naval air warfare was fundamentally reshaped, laying the groundwork for future carrier operations and establishing a new benchmark for fleet defense strategies. His influence continued to be felt through the harrowing battles of Iwo Jima, from February to March 1945, and the brutal, prolonged campaign for Okinawa from April 1 to late May 1945. Over 1,000 kamikazes were launched in April and May alone, with 355 hitting on April 7, 8, a stark reminder of the persistent threat. As the war progressed, Thach was promoted to captain on April 28, 1945, just weeks after President Roosevelt's death on April 12. With Germany's surrender on May 7, 1945, the Pacific became the singular intensified focus. McCain and Thach would resume command of Task Force 38 on May 28, 1945. Continuing their relentless pressure, raids on Okinawa and southern Kyushu followed on June 2, 1945, as the Allies inexorably closed in on the Japanese home islands. Okinawa was declared secured on June 21, 1945, officially confirmed on July 2, 1945. The Potsdam Declaration was issued July 26, 1945, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. The final months of World War II saw a strategic shift for U.S. strategic side. Naval air power in the Pacific, moving beyond traditional shipping interdiction to target Japanese industrial and air strength directly. This era was marked by grappling with weather's limitations, evolving enemy tactics, and internal debates on operational strategy. The narrative also highlights the profound personal impact of leadership and friendship, forged in the intense crucible of wartime. A severe typhoon on June 4-5, 1945, brought devastating damage to flight decks and catapults on carriers like Hornet and Bennington. Hornet's World War II combat days were over, while Bennington was repaired in a month. Poor meteorological advice had directly contributed to Halsey's fleet, turning into the typhoon, causing significant damage and aircraft losses. This marked an inauspicious start to Thach's return to combat command. The shift in target selection strategy became paramount by summer 1945, with neutralizing enemy aircraft declared the #1 priority. Thach and McCain emphasized meticulous target selection, the second McCain's meticulous target selection, eschewing junk targets for those of great value and importance, striking vital industrial targets with enough bombs to preclude effective dispersal. The blanket attack was not merely defensive, it was a direct strike against air strength. Requiring pilots to be re-educated beyond traditional shipping targets. Bombing idle docks and repair facilities was deemed a waste of effort. Illustrative targets included 268 locomotives, 87 factory buildings, 28 fuel tanks, and 23 railroad stations. A critical flaw in strategy emerged with the demarcation line for air operations, creating a strategic hole for enemy kamikazes to escape Allied air cover. During the July 10 Tokyo attack, pilots encountered expected flak traps of damaged aircraft and surprisingly better enemy pilots than in the South. Buck, ever the tactician, desired to observe new Japanese fighters, but was denied by McCain, who famously stated Thach, "No sins too much, valuing his intelligence, if captured, over combat heroics." This challenged the subtle myth that command was solely about personal bravery, but also about preserving critical intellectual capital. A battleship bombardment of Kamaishi steelworks on July 14 expended 416-inch shells with only a 20% accuracy rate, delivering 12,000 pounds of explosives. Thach's counter-analysis was incisive. 8 well-placed 1,000-pound bombs from Hellcats could disable coke ovens, achieving the same result. This debunked the myth of battleship superiority over precision bombing for specific industrial targets. The Baka bomb threat, human-guided rocket planes, carried by twin-engine bombers and diving at approximately 450 miles, presented a new, fearsome challenge. Considerable photographic evidence of kamikaze near misses, particularly against larger ships, attested to the constant danger. Some enemy planes in northern Honshu and Hokkaido were planning suicide missions to B-29 bases in the Marianas, necessitating disruption. A heroic rescue operation in the Sea of Japan on July 28 saw an Army pilot flying a PBY flying boat rescue 2 downed carrier pilots. 4 destroyers used lights to aid the night landing before the PBY was intentionally sunk post-rescue. A remarkable act. A Navy Cross recommendation followed for the PBY pilot's valor. The cumulative effect of U.S. naval and air power, alongside strategic bombings and the Soviet entry, brought about Japan's surrender. The August 6 Hiroshima bombing initially caused bewilderment. Carrier planes attacked northern Honshu on August 9-10, despite the demarcation line concerns. An attack on Bori, DD-704, on August 9 resulted in 114 casualties due to kamikazes flying through the very Army/Navy hole Thach had identified. The Nagasaki bombing drew little attention as planning for strikes continued. Better weather forecasting allowed Task Force 38 to follow a typhoon and attack on August 13, turning a hazard into an aid for attacks. On August 15, strikes were launched towards Tokyo, but a recall was issued upon receipt of the ceasefire. Some planes were still lost, and enemy planes engaged, even in the war's final hours. The ultimate end of the war, marked by the atomic bombings and Soviet declaration of war, solidified these strategic shifts. Post-surrender statistics from July 1 to August 15 revealed 23,556 sorties, resulting in 10,678 attacks, 4,619 tons of bombs, and 22,036 rockets were expended. 307 planes were lost. 174 combat, 133 operational, with 126 pilots and 71 crewmen killed. Enemy aircraft claims totaled 2,423, including 116 in air, 5 by AA fire, 1,011 destroyed on ground, and 1161 damaged. 247 vessels were sunk/damaged, including 31 warships along with 618 small craft. Total claims from May 28 to August 15 reached 2,965 planes put out of action. Warships claimed destroyed/damaged included 1 battleship, 2 battleship carrier hybrids, 1 heavy cruiser, 1 light cruiser, 8 destroyers, and 12 escorts. The contrasting personalities and philosophies of leadership, particularly between Mitchell and McCain, significantly influenced operational execution. McCain, whom Thach saw like losing his father for the second time, was open to new ideas, had pilots on the flag bridge, and spoke forcefully to Halsey. Mitchell, though very good, didn't see the need to hear from anybody else much, and was less receptive to modifications. Thach's 3-strike blanket tactic, though initially met with reservations, was adopted more readily by McCain. Thach also advocated for night fighters early on, a concept Mitchell was not keen on due to pilot rest concerns, but McCain supported improvements. Admiral Halsey, the fleet commander, made final calls on Typhoon course changes and requested McCain and Thach attend the surrender, a testament to their intertwined roles. The profound personal loss of McCain shortly after the war underscored the deep bonds formed during the intense years of combat. Thach's continued advocacy for naval aviation and his reflections on leadership would inform future naval strategy for decades to come. His oral history, taken in 1971, provides a pivotal lens, allowing for a re-examination of events and personalities. It challenges simplified historical portrayals, offering a more nuanced perspective on figures like Admiral McCain. Effective command and operational success, Thach argued, was often a complex interplay of personality, differing philosophies, and the immense pressures of wartime decision-making. It was not merely about clear-cut distinctions between meticulous planners like Admiral Spruance and commanders operating on dispatch. Thach insisted McCain held tactical command throughout his tenure, originating orders rather than merely executing Halsey's. This subtly debunks the myth that McCain lacked tactical command, or that Halsey was dissatisfied with his performance. Their working relationship during the South China Sea refueling operation suggests Halsey was not irritated with McCain. Admiral King, often seen as austere, was portrayed by Thach with unexpected warmth. However, post-war demobilization and budget cuts directly impacted training pipelines, leading to imbalances in pilot production and safety concerns. The creation of the Air Force in 1947 marked the formal beginning of the unification struggle, a direct threat to naval aviation. McCain's Navy Cross, awarded for escorting damaged ships like Canberra and Houston from Formosa, highlights his sustained effectiveness under fire. His speeches publicly credited Thach for the 3-strike blanket system, a clear acknowledgement of his subordinate's innovation. The film Task Force and Thach's involvement in it underscored the growing recognition of aircraft carriers as the central pillar of naval power. Thach's dedication to rigorous pilot training demonstrated its critical role in combat effectiveness. It was essential for preventing needless casualties in the rapidly advancing jet age. 2 years were needed to train an aviator, emphasizing the long lead time and the impact of budget fluctuations. This fight for naval aviation's identity, manifesting in the revolt of the admirals, revealed the intense struggle to preserve the autonomy and importance of carrier-based air power. This foundational struggle ultimately validated the strategic necessity of carrier forces. It underscored the irreplaceable value of skilled naval aviators. Amidst this, Jimmie Thach's tactical genius emerged. His Thach weave became a cornerstone of U.S. Navy fighter doctrine. It directly contributed to turning the tide in aerial engagements. This mutual support beam tactic was a defensive and offensive innovation. It transformed the F-4 Wildcat's performance at low altitude, allowing it to challenge the superior maneuverability of the Mitsubishi A-6M2 Type 0 carrier fighter, the Zeke. The weave's development was critical, born from lessons learned, even those from losses at Wake Island. It debunked the idea that naval aviation success was solely due to superior aircraft, emphasizing tactics and rigorous pilot training instead. The broader Pacific strategy also held its own complexities. The Aleutian Islands campaign, for instance, was not a mere Japanese diversionary tactic. This challenges a common historical perception. Such nuanced understandings were vital for strategic planning. Thach, a central figure, saw his innovations tested on June 4, 1942. This was the pivotal date of the Battle of Midway. That day, he famously saved Commander Esda's life. The courage of torpedo squadrons like Massey's 12 TBDs was legendary. Though VT-6's estimated 2 hits were none certain, and the flawed torpedo pistol, P.2, hampered many attacks. The heroism was undeniable, but the losses were stark. Survivors like George Gay and Albert K. Burt Ernest of VT-8 recounted their harrowing experiences. Oral histories and personal accounts reveal the discrepancies in how events were remembered, suggesting a complex reality beyond official reports. For example, the exact sequence of TBD losses prior to Massey's, or Thach's precise reporting chain to Vice Admiral Fletcher. Rear Admiral Robert E. Laub, a senior surviving VT-6 pilot, later absolved Pilot Gray from blame. Lieutenant Commander Richard Dick best understood Gray's dilemma. The trauma was real, with enlisted pilot Stephen Smith even accosting Gray after the battle. Post-war, Thach's career continued its trajectory of adaptation. Confronting the growing Soviet submarine threat became paramount. Admiral Donitz's U-boat campaigns of War II underscored this danger. The development of dedicated ASW forces was crucial. Thach led Task Group Alpha, a vanguard in this Cold War challenge, ensuring the U.S. Navy's persistent advantage in naval warfare. He even influenced the F-8F Bearcats design, insisting climb rate be the most significant factor for the fastest climbing propeller-driven Navy fighter. The ruggedness of the Hellcat's R2800 engine, exemplified by a landing with significant damage, further proved vital. This continuous adaptation of tactics and technology, exemplified by Thach's career, was non-negotiable. It ensured the U.S. Navy's persistent advantage. The long-lasting impact of these early wartime innovations shaped subsequent military planning and fueled technological development for decades to come.